I'm Jahan Colbreth, and I'm the Director of Federal Relations at the Council for Higher Education Accreditation. CHEA is quickly approaching the 2024 annual conference themed Quality Assurance Matters. It will begin January 29th and run through February 1st in Washington, D.C. We're also excited to present the third and final edition of CHEA's 3 pre-conference videos. This video and our previous 2 bring together revered higher education thought leaders who delve into timely, compelling issues affecting higher education. So if you haven't yet watched our 2 previous pre-conference videos, you can now find them on the CHEA website. So let's begin by welcoming you to our third video, Quality Matters and Quality Delivery. Now this video features Dr. Deb Adair, Dr. Rachel Brooks, Dr. Bethany Simonich, and Dr. MJ Bishop. With that said, Dr. Adair, take it away.
Thank you, and thank you very much to CHEA for this invitation to come and put this video together. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. Okay, so my name is Dr. Deb Adair. I'm the CEO of Quality Matters, and coming together today to have this conversation is Dr. Bethany Simonich, who is Quality Matters VP of Innovation and Research. We also have Dr. Rachel Brooks, who's very recently QM's Director of Quality Assurance Implementation Solutions. Previously, Dr. Brooks was the director of the Office of E-Learning at North Carolina Central University, and I think today she'll be speaking largely to her experiences in that role. And then we have Dr. MJ Bishop, who's Vice President for Integrative Learning Design at the University of Maryland Global Campus. I'd like to just to introduce the topic that we'll be engaging around today. It is really talking about the value proposition of higher education, and high quality teaching and learning is more critical now than ever. We know that higher education now has to be innovative and flexible in the ways they're delivering learning. And I'm proud to say that QM has been at the intersection of quality and innovation since we began 20 years ago as a signal of interinstitutional quality assurance in online learning. Pre-pandemic, for us, this meant a focus on well-designed online courses, both supporting and demonstrating that online education could be of high quality. Post-pandemic, there's another question. We're seeing more demand from students and broad institutional engagement in digital learning. And so we have sought to open our aperture, if you will, to take a much broader view of quality, really to support this movement we're seeing towards purpose-built online education at a greater scale and in greater variety in place of the online courses and programs that previously had been developed in a sort of ad hoc and one-off approaches. So we also know that with this deeper knowledge about digital learning comes increased quality assurance expectations. And this is really our topic today. So I'd like to turn to the panelists now to hear their thoughts on how we're identifying and navigating this increasingly complex landscape while we're trying to create and ensure quality learning experiences. And actually, I want to start with Bethany. And Bethany, as Quality Matters Vice President of Innovation and Research and the co-director of the CHEA surveys, you've chronicled changes in the online learning landscape for the last 9 years. So I'd like to invite you to give us a brief overview of what the CHEA survey has revealed about changes in online education and the quality assurance challenges we face today. And if you could give us a brief snapshot of what it looks like to navigate this complexity in higher education.
Absolutely. So just a little bit of background on the CHEA report, because as Deb mentioned, I'm going to be pulling some data from that. So the CHEA project, it stands for the Changing Landscape of Online Education. It was first published in 2017, and it was founded as a partnership between Quality Matters and also Ancora EduVentures. And what we're really trying to chronicle is that senior online leader perspective at higher education institutions, and to really look at how online learning is treated differently, whether or not, or how it's integrated institutional strategy, and some of the investments that institutions are making in good quality online learning. So it presents a unique perspective of that senior online leader, that chief online learning officer. We have a wide variety of institutions that are represented within the CHEA report, 2-year public higher ed institutions, and also 4-year public and 4-year private institutions. Currently, we are working on CHEA 9, so just a little plug there for when that comes out. And we do have a new organizational partner this year with EDUCAUSE. But just to set the stage a little bit with data, back in CHEA 7, we asked chief online learning officers whether or not they were seeing increased interest coming out of that remote learning period from the pandemic. So looking at whether or not online class sections were filling first, whether or not students were asking for more online options. And you can see here that overwhelmingly they said yes, a bit higher and much higher across all student demographic groups. And what I want to call your attention to here, because we're going to see this repeated throughout a lot of the data, is look at that light blue column for traditional undergraduates. So that was one of the most marked changes that came out of the pandemic and that remote learning period, was that traditional undergraduates, even those who are really still seeking that campus-based experience, they are experiencing more interest in online learning, asking for more online options. CHEA 8, we repeated the question. We asked those senior online leaders again, are you seeing continued interest and rising interest in online learning? And as you can see, yet again, across all 3 student demographic groups here, traditional age undergraduates, adult undergraduates, and graduate students, increased interest across the board, and for a high majority of them as well. So one of the things then that senior online leaders were looking at is, how is this going to change the campus experience? Because students are asking for more online options. We are offering more online. And in part, that came down from that remote learning experience. So a lot of those courses then matured into fully online classes. So we asked chief online officers in CHEA 7, what do you think the campus experience, the educational experience is going to look like in 2025? And they predicted a more balanced experience, and not balanced in terms of more hybrid learning, but more balanced in terms of, even if you are that traditional age undergraduate on an institutional campus here in the U.S., you're going to have more online classes that are going to be part of your curriculum. So that balance between on-campus and online is shifting a lot since the pandemic. You can see here that chief online officers are still predicting that traditional age undergraduates will probably have a majority on campus, but some online, but still a very strong representation for that more balanced experience, 40% for traditional age undergraduates. And then you can see when we move into adult undergraduates and graduates, the shifts are even more dramatic there. So that brings us to the question of, how are institutions dealing with this rising demand? So this is from CHEA 7, where we started to talk about strategic institutional tensions that might be coming out of that pandemic. You can see here that a lot of institutions at that point were still working to align their institutional strategy to better reflect this rising online demand, both for courses and for online degree programs. Again, noting that traditional undergraduate line there, 46% of institutions were working to align, 18% said we are simply not aligned with this demand at all. We repeated the question a little bit differently in CHEA 8, and really asking institutions in a little bit more granular detail about the alignment between their institutional strategy, their institutional resources, and again, this current and anticipated increased demand for online learning. Only 39% said that their institutional strategy was consistent with demand. So the majority said either it's consistent and it's straining the resources, or we're re-examining it. A very, very small amount said we're not seeing the demand, or in spite of the demand that we are seeing, we are committed to being a campus-based institution. But by and large, what we're seeing here is a picture of institutions really wrestling with this idea. How do we best meet this demand, still maintain our culture and context as an institution, but really put the resources and investments that we made during the pandemic into online learning, really put that into use moving forward. So this paints a more complex picture when you see institutions really truly mainstreaming online learning and starting to no longer other it and saying, well, what are we going to do for online students? It's really now a question of what are we going to do for all of our students, regardless of the modality that we are offering them. And that brings us into something that is a lot more complex, because once institutions really aim to fully integrate online learning, they have to look at it in a more robust, holistic 360-degree way. And that means that you're no longer just charging one single campus office, for example, with doing quality online learning, but you're looking at all of the different campus offices and policies and processes that need to be created in order to really elevate online learning and offer it at the quality that you're promising your students. So there's people at the institution that are going to be involved in this effort. You need a strategic communication plan, policies and guidelines around online, including things like design standards and how you're going to review those courses for quality assurance. What support resources are you going to bring to bear to this effort? Faculty development and training, for example, the processes that you'll need to create around that, and then also evaluation of the efficacy of these efforts and a plan for continuous improvement. So here at Quality Matters, we have been researching this for 7+ years now, and we've talked to institutions that have done this work. We've talked to a lot of campus leaders who have really done this work on the ground, so practitioners that are really also embedded in the research. And what really has come out of that is a fairly complex picture for how institutions really need to think about this landscape for quality online learning. And so at Quality Matters, we've come up with what we've dubbed the QUAIL for short, but the Quality Assurance Implementation Landscape. And what you can see on the screen is really the complexity that's involved with doing online learning well, from the people that need to be involved, including the coordinator or leader of this effort, as well as, of course, faculty, instructional designers, folks in teaching and learning centers, the communication around this, including those crucial early conversations for campus buy-in to really address some of the difficult questions and get ahead of some of those barriers. Policies and guidelines, for example, creating or developing or adopting design standards, as well as policies that you need to pay attention to nationally, like regular and substantive interaction, accessibility, and then supporting faculty, online learning staff in doing that work. Processes around course design, review, maintenance, and revision. So anybody that's involved in online learning knows that it's not just that great idea, it's putting it into practice by creating a process, and then somebody needs to oversee that as well. And that kind of falls into that evaluation column. So making sure that an institution is starting out with strategic goals that make sense for them, their faculty, their staff, and their learners, and then really developing goals around that so you know what data that you need to collect in order to show the efficacy of your efforts, and you can also use that then to create a plan for continuous improvement. So I think that we're at a place right now where it's very complex, and institutions are really struggling to meet this demand and still respect their institutional culture and context.
So I really do appreciate that, Bethany, because I think you've teed this up nicely for me to bring in Rachel and MJ in this conversation to kind of tell us about what it looks like on campus. And MJ, I would like to start with you. So in addition to your role at University of Maryland Global Campus, you're also the chair and president of the Quality Matters Board, but today we're going to tap you for your expertise in online learning. So what we'd like to know is, how have you been engaging, particularly post-pandemic, in quality assurance work to support digital learning? And what does that look like in terms of compliance and adherence to policies and meeting strategic goals? And what results are you seeing from that effort?
First of all, thank you for having me. So pleased to be part of this conversation today. So yes, I'm, in addition to my role on the Quality Matters Board, Vice President for Integrative Learning Design at UMGC. For those who aren't aware, UMGC is a fully standalone institution in the university system of Maryland. We're not an outshoot from College Park, but rather, a separate institution, and almost fully online. We do do have face-to-face and some hybrid courses that we offer overseas on military bases, but largely beyond that, we are fully online, asynchronous, offering courses at scale. So not a lot changed for us pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, except for everything that you just described, Bethany, in your slides, which is that, you know, everybody was online for those couple of years. Everybody now understands that, hey, this may not be so bad after all. Maybe we can do this. And I think beginning to understand exactly that demand that you are seeing in the CHEA data, Bethany. So, you know, we're starting to feel the competition a bit. And I think also understanding that, as you've said, quality needs to be about a lot more now, and rightly so, than just the quality of the design within the course itself. That we need to be looking much more broadly across our institutions at quality assurance in the support of all kinds of digital learning, not necessarily just online learning, but also the face-to-face environment, hybrid and high flex opportunities for students to engage. And that's going to mean engaging our institutions and thinking in a much more learner-centered way about how are we providing the kinds of services our students need in order to be successful? How do we meet them where we are and make good use of the technologies and the tools to support the kind of learning the learning experiences that we want our students to have? To stop thinking in terms of, okay, it's all online, 100%, we're going to throw everything into the online space versus the face-to-face space, but rather thinking about, you know, who are our learners and what modalities should we be using in order to reach them where they are. So in terms of, you know, quality assurance work, yes, absolutely. You know, we're a QM shop. We have adopted those guidelines in the ways in which we're designing the courses themselves. But we're now also beginning to think much more broadly about the student supports, about, you know, now we're in an environment in the online space where we actually can, we have the technology to be able to do much more, incorporating student success coaches, engaging in the kind of data collection that we need in order to know when students are at risk and to be proactive about that instead of reactive. So there are a lot of things that we're exploring in very deep ways to support that work and to create the kind of, I'm pointing at the slide now, but to create the kinds of intersections among all of these cells that Bethany has on her slide to make sure that we're creating that optimally effective environment.
Thank you, MJ. I appreciate that. And Rachel, I want to bring you into the conversation because we asked you to participate in this because of you were in the driver's seat in the effort at your previous institution with NCCU and in your roles there. And we'd like you to reflect a little bit on what required the most effort for you, or maybe a different mindset in moving from on-campus to digital teaching and learning, and to really reflect on the work you're doing you did do there to assure quality in your courses as you made that change. And really to reflect on the comments from MJ and Bethany as well. So please.
Absolutely. And thank you for that question. So I'm really excited to address this question because as you had shared, Deb, I came from a unique environment as the director of the Office of E-Learning at North Carolina Central University, in that we, NCCU, is the first state-supported liberal arts college for African Americans and has grown its audience of students since that founding time to service individuals from a variety of backgrounds, experiences. And so in doing so, what we found was although we started out primarily as a campus-based institution where most of the courses were being taught face-to-face, as my son affectionately says, NCCU has been engaged in online learning and distance education since the 1900s. And so what that has meant is that when we opened the doors for online learning, many, many years prior to the founding of the Office of E-Learning in 2015, there wasn't a lot of thought that was placed into quality assurance as it related to the online space. Many of our colleagues would design courses, they would teach courses in very similar ways in which they would approach face-to-face instruction. And so the Office of E-Learning was born from this need to be very intentional around the not only support of online learners, but around ensuring that quality in the online learning space. And so since that time, NCCU has been able to really utilize a number of the characteristics that are found in that quality assurance implementation landscape, where there has been very intentional consideration related to how each of those components work together to create a robust and high quality online experience. I think one of the successes that was definitely found in shifting that mentality and that mindset around online learning was the investment from administrators as well as from the faculty. So it was very much top down and bottom up. That communication and coordination across the various stakeholders, engaging students who were not only taking classes in fully online programs, but also those students who were engaged in the face-to-face courses, who for a variety of reasons, perhaps wanting to reduce the time to degree, or because it was more flexible for their schedules and supported their unique needs, would engage in online learning as well. Collaborating with the various IT individuals, our instructional design team, building an instructional design team. And so, thinking about how to really integrate that into the message of the institution was something that required a shift in mindset, not only with the administrators, but also the faculty. A number of policies and guidelines, as Bethany had articulated, were certainly considered. It shifted the approach that the institution used for digital accessibility. For many years, it was not even on the radar. We, despite having an Office of Student Accessibility Services, realized in our engagement with Quality Matters that we needed to take it a step further, creating policies that were approved by the Board of Trustees and adjoining professional development for faculty members to help them understand not only how to create courses that were accessible to a variety of learners, but also knowing about the supports and services that were available on campus. Another key consideration was really thinking about the services that were currently being offered that were considered critical to supporting the face-to-face students and what services were being offered to online learners. And then thinking about the nuances of online learning to create and sometimes, revise, reinvent, and collaboratively develop services that could support those unique needs for online learners. And then as it relates to that evaluation piece, especially, and tying that in with the processes, there was intentional collaboration that had to happen that wasn't existent before. But that collaboration with the e-learning units, the distance education units, and leaders on campus, such as our provost, many of our associate vice chancellors, our head of strategic planning, as well as our head of accreditation, to engage with them and be very intentional about ensuring that online learning and the goals that were being addressed in the online learning space were interwoven into the fabric of the institution at a strategic level. And so we've been very fortunate, and I recognize it's quite a unique case, but it has been a very fortunate experience of being able to see how even laying the foundation for many of these areas can support a well thought out and successfully implemented quality assurance plan that allows an institution that maybe thought of online learning after the face-to-face environment, still be able to go back and effectively ensure that quality in the online space was not something separate from or in addition to the quality in the face-to-face space, but was considered a strategic and critical component in the success of the institution itself.
Thank you, Rachel. And I want to take a minute and pick up on a thread that I heard you weave throughout your comments although I'm going to ask Bethany to respond first, which is really about the role of senior administrators, because I heard in your story that there are really important roles there. So what questions should senior administrators be asking about the quality of their online or digital programs, and how can they best support the development of those programs? So Bethany, I'd like, if you wouldn't mind answering that, and of course, MJ and Rachel, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I think there are two main questions that senior leaders should be asking in terms of online quality assurance. How are we supporting it, and how are we talking about it? So going to a little bit of CHEA data on this, in CHEA 7, we investigated quality assurance, whether or not they were actually assuring quality versus simply adopting quality assurance standards. So as you can see by the graph on the screen there, asynchronous courses very much outpacing other modalities in terms of true quality assurance. So chief online officers told us that all for 50% online asynchronous courses must meet standards for a variety of reasons. Other institutions said this is optional, whether by department or faculty. But you can see there in terms of requirements, it decreases greatly from that asynchronous 50%. Down to 27% for synchronous courses, much less for multimodal and hybrid. You can also see here that there are some modalities where institutions are telling us they haven't adopted any quality standards that courses are required to meet. And look at the difference there between face-to-face courses at that top bar and online asynchronous at that bottom bar. 38% of chief online officers said we don't even have quality standards for face-to-face courses, whereas only 5% of chief online learning officers said that for asynchronous. So first and foremost, look at whether or not you are practicing true assurance for quality. And if you are, or if you are not yet practicing it, look more specifically about how you're supporting that. So how are you supporting faculty in actually designing courses to meet your institutionally adopted standards? And that might be by providing them staff help in the form of instructional designers, by creating a really good and robust institutional design process that really guides them through that process. It could be in other ways, other support resources as well, such as giving them really a really good start by creating a learning management system template that's embedded with quality assurance standards. We recently did a masterclass on that with D2L. So there are a lot of ways that institutions can look at how they're supporting it. But the other thing that I mentioned, Deb, was how are they talking about it? So in CHEA 8, we talked about this idea called quiet quality, meaning most higher ed institutions are practicing some form of online quality assurance, whether it is, as you can see here, technology support for online students, looking for that quality online teaching, benchmarking courses and programs, really looking at that design, or really supporting students academically or outside of the classroom, student support options. But you can see here, by and large, the majority of chief online officers told us we are practicing this facet of quality assurance, but very few said that they are communicating it to their current students, and even less said they're communicating it in order to recruit prospective students. So I'm going to stop sharing there, but I think that brings us around nicely to this point in the conversation where we're seeing increased demand from students. We're seeing students being more discerning, especially when they're looking at online degree programs. I foresee that quality is going to be a differentiating factor more and more as we move into the future, and yet institutions still in some ways aren't truly practicing quality assurance, but I think even more notably, they're not talking about it. So I know institutions are doing these efforts. I encourage you to talk about it. So maybe Rachel and MJ can weigh in on that.
Absolutely. I'll be glad to chime in on that. I really appreciate what you had just shared, specifically around that quiet quality piece. At the institutional level, there is often concern that there's difficulty or there's a frustration even that might come up because institutions know they're doing the work. They know they're doing the work in a variety of ways because they are, to a variety of stakeholders, beholden to demonstrating that they have done the work. And yet it often comes up that they have not successfully told the story. And so as it relates to how administrators can support in this effort, really working with the various units that would be involved, those teaching and learning centers, those online learning units, ed tech units, and the academic units, and helping to facilitate conversation and to develop this sense of community around quality assurance. We cannot have quality without community. And so making sure that each entity that is involved in this quality assurance process understands what their role is, investing in those areas. I think the Quail model is a wonderful tool to help even identify where there might be gaps. But then also being very intentional about identifying those areas where there are successes. And so especially as we're thinking about institution type, we'll find that as it relates to quality assurance, it is going to be different dependent upon the institutional context. But being able to utilize that kind of roadmap to help institutions see what they are doing well and where there are areas to make improvements will be a helpful way to put a plan in place that can be supported by administration, either through human resources, financial resources, or just through creativity.
And I'll hop in here real quick too, building on what Rachel just said. I think I would actually add one more question that I think online that administrators should be asking about their online program offerings, and that is, are we making the best use of the technology to achieve our mission and our goals? And again, the wholesale movement of face-to-face programs into the online space, I think, doesn't necessarily capitalize in all cases on the true affordances of an online program, which are about access. It's about creating more opportunities for learners to gain the opportunity to benefit from these learning experiences. Another data point here prior to the pandemic, I think I'm right about this, Bethany, that the largest growing population of online learners at that point were learners taking online classes from an institution within a 50-mile radius of their homes. They were looking for that access. These are people that, may have been working full time, may have been at home with small children that they needed to care for, or aging parents, whatever the situation. But they wanted that regional institution because they wanted that connection to campus. They wanted that ability to engage in a variety of ways, and yet we're looking for that online access. So, thinking strategically about the places where online can actually make a difference in your mission and in your financial and fiscal goals, whatever they may be, and recognizing too that it's not necessarily going to be a panacea for enrollment growth, but rather could be a huge boon for retention and for success of your students and lifelong learning and other opportunities for them to engage with your institution. So I think that would be a third question that I would add to the two that you had, Bethany, which were also great. But, strategically, what are we doing with online in order to make a difference?
I have to raise a question because none of you in our discussion so far have talked about either of these issues. And, I think these days, these issues are taking up a lot of attention, particularly as we're thinking about innovation in higher education and what the implication of that is for quality. But the two topics really are academic integrity, particularly now with the rise of artificial intelligence. And of course, we could spend an entire session just on the topic of artificial intelligence. But I noticed that issue about the integrity of the learning that happens in online learning was not an issue for any of you. And I also noticed that aside from Bethany, your chart about different modalities in terms of the work they're doing for quality assurance, none of you really talked about the importance of or the implications of experimentation and different delivery modalities. And I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about why is that? Why wasn't this top of mind for you when you were talking about quality and innovation in higher education?
Well, I don't mind jumping in first, Rachel, on this one, if that's all right. So for me, at least, the academic integrity piece, that's something as an institution that we've been wrestling with for many years. As you can imagine, the question about ensuring that we have, that our students aren't cheating, that they're not using the opportunity to be learning from a distance to engage contract learners who would, take the courses for them and so forth. Those are questions that have existed for some time with us. And we made a very deliberate decision probably, now 2014, 2015, in that time frame, to say, no, we're not going to engage in a big way with proctoring tools. First of all, at the time, the technologies were pretty clunky and, created more anxiety and stress for learners as they were taking high stakes exams to get the technology working properly, and created a lot of issues there. But in addition, I think that our philosophy has been that, first of all, we ought to be supporting and educating learners about what an academic integrity means. And secondly, we ought to be working a little harder at the designs of our courses and our assessments to ensure that they're as cheat-proof as possible and engaging as possible, so that our students will want to complete them instead of cheating on them. So that's an approach we've taken for many years. So about this time last year, when things were really blowing up with ChatGPT and we were seeing the headlines, reading the death of the essay and all those sorts of things, we found ourselves in a position that really there wasn't a whole lot we had to do to tweak things. We still are very much working on how to create those authentic assessments and the kinds of things that require you to pull from your own experience and to talk about the things going on in your world that make it difficult to cheat on. Beyond that, we more or less, as AI came on, just needed to tweak a couple of policies to ensure that AI was talked about. We have created a syllabus statement. We are embracing artificial intelligence as part of the skill set that we believe our learners need to adopt, and encouraging the use of it ethically and within the academic integrity guidelines. So there wasn't a whole lot we had to tweak there, Deb. It's part of the reason it didn't come immediately to mind to me. In terms, just real quickly on the modalities, I kind of alluded to this a little bit in, I think, my answer to the first question, but from my perspective personally, having been in instructional design for quite some time now, I see these as, this is the water the fish are swimming in, right? Moving in and out between face-to-face and online and hybrid, high flex, whatever it may be. I would like for the fish not to know that they're moving in and out of various streams and tributaries and so forth. I think it's just about, delivery of high quality instruction, no matter what the modality is. We need to understand what high quality means in the ways in which we design it. But for me, it's all one part of the bigger digital quality in digital learning experiences conversation.
I think those are wonderful points, MJ. And North Carolina Central University has taken a similar approach as well, particularly as it's related to academic integrity. These are questions that have come up quite often. Again, it initially being a campus-based institution and then branching into a much more robust offering of online programs and online courses that may not even belong to fully online programs. The question around academic integrity and the various resources that are available to students to inauthentically create content is something that has definitely been at the forefront of many of our colleagues' minds as they're designing and delivering their courses. And so the approach that distance education, the Office of E-Learning at NCCU has taken has been very much around what you were just saying, related to authentic assessments. We have in turn pushed back and challenged faculty to rethink how they are assessing their learners, considering what are the skill sets that they would like for their learners to have when they enter into the workforce or they go into further degree, further studies. What is it that they are going to be embodying in those spaces and helping them to engage authentically in their demonstration of their achievement of these various objectives that have been set within the course. And so we think about, how can students create these original works that are aligned with the tasks that they would be completing when they are in the field. And also, I love what you were saying, MJ, about making it interesting to the students, helping to create assessments that are meaningful, that are relevant to what it is that they are learning, not just because it's something they're going to be doing, but also because the students can see themselves in those assessments, even the way in which they're being assessed. So stepping away from the standardized approach to considering, assessing students via tests or quizzes or exams, but thinking about how students can demonstrate these diverse ways of knowing. In doing so, they can get students to really be engaged in the assessment process, to be invested in it, and to be able to, as you were saying, cheat proof the assessment itself. What I loved also that you had mentioned was an approach as well that NCCU has taken, and that has been to embrace artificial intelligence. There have been statements and guidelines. There isn't an official policy just yet, but there are guidelines and recommendations around addressing it with students, determining what instructors see as an appropriate use of AI in their courses, but also encouraging instructors, since they are usually the ones who are most responsible for the development of courses, to think about how can you get your students to not shun AI, but to learn how to develop that skill, because once they are in the workforce, this is going to be a tool that they can utilize to help them do their jobs, to help them reach their goals. If they decide to be entrepreneurs, to be able to create and expand and grow. And so we don't want them to be afraid of it. We want to make sure that these students who are graduating have that premier education, and that incorporates embracing the changes that are happening in the environment. Now, as it relates to modalities, because again, NCCU is both a campus-based as well as providing an online platform for education, what we found is that because the instructors at NCCU who teach online also principally teach face-to-face courses. And so many of them have been utilizing what they're learning through this high quality assurance piece, working with Quality Matters, learning about the various best practice standards, and realizing that, these make sense in my face-to-face classroom. There are several standards, there are several best practices that can be incorporated that they see benefit their online students and can simultaneously benefit their students in the face-to-face environment. What's unique about NCCU as well is that even courses that are offered in that campus-based space, faculty members are encouraged to utilize the learning management system. Everyone receives a learning management space, a learning management shell, and they are encouraged to use that to expand their that kind of stagnant four walls that they have. And so in doing so, they are encouraged to utilize those online learning best practices to ensure that even their students who are engaged in the face-to-face environment can benefit from high quality digital resources and educational opportunities.
Thank you, Rachel and MJ. I appreciate that, both of those perspectives on this. And really what I'm hearing you say pretty loudly and clearly is that this discussion isn't really about the technology at all. It's about centering the learners, the online learners, in the work that they're doing. So, and actually, in all of your points so far during the panel has been about sort of the need to fully support online learners. So I want to give you sort of an opportunity to tie a bow on this a little bit and to say a little bit more about how institutions are or should be perhaps supporting students in online courses and programs, and really why this actually requires institutional attention to any quality assurance plan to do this. So talking about how to do this in an integrative way and focusing on the learner and not technology. So if you'd like to have make any final points about that.
I can start a little bit because I do want to talk about the changes that we've seen in online learner support over the years, especially, within the CHEA report. And I was so happy to see how much online learner support has matured, especially since the pandemic. So traditionally, institutions would offer an optional online student orientation. We saw that maturing a little bit more into a requirement during the pandemic, but it's something at least that most institutions have now. What we saw, though, post-pandemic is that institutions really did make investments in the ways that they had traditionally been supporting online learners, making sure that they understand the technology, they can use the learning management system, all of those things. But traditionally, institutions had not looked at all the other robust ways to support online students, and that is making sure they have access to online library services, online tutoring, online advising, and then also looking at the whole student. So one of the biggest data points that came out in the past couple of years in terms of online learner support was in CHLOE 7, chief online officers were said, we have made an investment in helping to support our students' mental well-being, in other ways looking at student health, in looking at student support outside of academic support services. So those campus clubs, things that relate to belonging, forming a community, making, even if you're a fully online student, making you feel as though you're a part of that institution and that campus. So I think, as I said, we've seen a lot of maturation of this in the past couple years. Institutions now are supporting online learners by looking at that whole student, that 360-degree robust support. So hopefully that continues to grow moving into the future. I'd love to see a little bit more of a requirement for that online student orientation, just to make sure our online learners really are prepared and that we've set them up for success as much as possible.
That's Bethany. Yeah, plus one to everything that you said. I think absolutely the case that we can be and should be doing more. I think we learned a lot during the pandemic. I remember I was in a different position at that time, but actually at our system office here in Maryland, and got a lot of inquiries from the student affairs folks asking, how do we do what we do online and while we're shut down. And so I think we gained a lot of experience. I guess I would just add one more thing to that and encourage us to also be just really keenly aware of who our learners are, and to broaden the conversation even further with respect to that. So, in our case, we although we're seeing a growing population of more traditional, right out of high school kinds of learners coming to us, we still largely serve an adult population. So ensuring that the support services and the things that we're making available to them are available when they need it, 24/7, weekends, times that they're not actually working. And to encourage to capitalize on the technologies and the data that we collect in an online course, in order to understand through analytics a lot more about who are students that certain behaviors lead to students that have more difficulty down the road. They haven't they don't log in until the day right before class starts. They submit their first assignment a little late, whatever it may be. The kinds of things that start to make us recognize, okay, this is a student that seems to be falling a bit behind, and to be proactive about the way in which we can support them. Those are the kinds of things that we can do in the online space that aren't nearly as possible in a face-to-face environment, and would encourage us to capitalize on those opportunities.
These are all excellent recommendations, and I would share as well that this is a consideration that can seem quite daunting for many institutions as they're thinking about wanting to go into the online space and supporting their online learners, particularly those who are have had that presence in the face-to-face environment, that campus-based environment, and thinking about what does that look like in the online space. I'd like to offer a recommendation, and that being, look at what you're doing now. Look at what you are doing well with your students who are attending these face-to-face courses. What are not only the services and resources that you provide, but really consider as an institution, what is the rationale for having those services and resources? And why does it make sense to have complementary resource or service, an extension, or investing in those services to address what those unique needs are for online learners. Being able to do that really taps back to what Bethany was talking about as it relates to the whole student. One area of success that I was really excited to see at NCCU was the creation of an award ceremony, a virtual award ceremony, which reflected the honors convocation, a time-honored tradition that happens on NCCU's campus in the spring. A few years ago, the distance education unit started holding live award ceremonies for online learners, and their families would be in the chat celebrating, "That's my babies, I'm so proud, congratulations." But it builds that sense of community, that sense of belonging that Bethany had mentioned. And so as institutions are thinking about, well, what does it mean to support online learners? Remembering that regardless of modality, they are still your learners. And so what do you see are the services and resources that should be in place to support these learners in meeting that goal of earning that certificate, earning that degree, or successfully completing a particular course? And how can you translate that to offering those kinds of services in the online environment?
I think that's an awesome point to stop at, actually, because I think, Bethany, I'm thinking about where you started us off with the conversation about we're moving away from othering online learning, and the way we do that is focusing on the student and whatever their needs are, whatever the modality that they're in, and being able to to develop sophisticated quality assurance processes around that. And actually the work that's had to happen in online can actually inform practices throughout all modalities. So I'm really happy that you all joined us today. Thank you very much for your expertise. I know that if anyone who's watching this would like to reach out to any of you with any questions, I'm sure you would be more than happy to respond. And so thank you all for your time, and thank you everyone who's listening.
Thank you, Drs. Adair, Brooks, Simonich, and Bishop, for your excellent and powerful look at quality matters and quality delivery. Your compelling dialogue has given us much to think about as we work to ensure the highest level of quality assurance in higher education. Well, that concludes CHEA's pre-conference videos. We hope that you've enjoyed them, and now we look forward to seeing you at the CHEA 2024 Annual Conference in Washington, D.C. later this month. Once again, I'm Jahan Colbreth, and I'll see you at the conference.